You're on the Six Screens Telenetwork, earning the reputation of giving all the right ingredients, uninhibited, and exposing the hard, cold facts about the Watchtower Society. And now, the end is near.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome in to Making Disciples with Jay Hess. Wow, we're so glad he's on with us today. He comes on every 2 weeks. He's answering Bible questions. If you have Bible questions for Jay, we got a lot of people that are leaving the Watchtower right now. Many are coming into the Six Screen. So if you're listening to our program and you have some theological questions, the man coming up next, he can answer those questions for you. So let's bring Jay on, and he's coming out of North Carolina, and there he is Mr. Jay Hess. So, Jay, what's it like down in North Carolina today?
Beautiful weather today. It's pretty nice. So it's all good. Yep, we just came back just from a vacation where we went down in South Carolina with the beach. The beach was very nice. Good weather all the days and basically good waves. I don't surf anymore, but we did get on the beach, get to watch the waves and feel the breeze. So yeah, it's a wonderful place to live. I grew up in California, but I love the green of the Carolinas and I love the weather and I love the beach. So that's what we're doing here. I'm Jay Hess, and as you know, this is a show that is driven by your questions. I can come up with questions that I think are interesting, but I prefer to hear your questions. Anything at all to do with the Bible, with Christianity, especially if it's got an application for Jehovah's Witnesses or not, whatever is fine. I am an ex-witness. I was raised in it in the Watchtower. I was baptized back in '69 and believed it, went door to door, even vacation pioneered for a little time. That's what we called it back then. I was really sure that this was the truth. And then over time, got some challenging questions brought to me in the door-to-door ministry. The first one that really hit hard was, what do we believe about, what does the Watchtower say about Hebrews chapter 1, verse 6, about worshiping Jesus? And the Watchtower had changed its New World Translation from saying that we were angels worship Jesus to the angels do obeisance. And I researched that and found out that the Watchtower's official charter, the charter filed in Pennsylvania, you think it would be New York, but actually they started in Pennsylvania. So it was filed in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And you can get an official copy of their official charter, or you can travel to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania yourself and go to their Recorder of Deeds office and get a legal copy of their charter. And in it, it says that one of the purposes of the Watchtower is to worship Jehovah God and Jesus Christ. So that was a really interesting question to me, because if it was important to worship Jesus, then why don't they? And why are they changing their view from what they used to believe? They used to believe that Jesus should be worshipped up until the early 1950s. Then they kind of let it slide and they didn't talk about it much. And then in the late 1990s, early 1990s, they changed their view, and it appeared in the theocratic school list that they would give and that you would hear in the Kingdom Ministry. I don't know if they do that anymore. Then by the end of the 1990s, they had updated their charter that they worship Jesus. Well, at late 1990s, they said they took out that phrase and that they don't worship Jesus. That changed them. So that was what started me with me in my investigation. Along that time, in the late 1980s, I was invited to get involved with the Watchtower Society's writing department, research and writing, and was invited to write a series of Watchtower articles challenging and refuting the Trinity. And in that challenge, and in that assignment, rather, I remembered the challenge of Hebrews 1:6 about worshiping Jesus, and another verse, John 5:23, that Jesus was to be honored just as the Father is honored. And what does that mean? And that's what got me out of the Watchtower. I was found guilty of worshiping Jesus. I didn't deny it, and I was expelled for that. And you're wondering, well, why did I pick on those verses, Hebrews 1:6 and John 5:23? Where did that idea come up? And the answer is, that's the verse. Those are the two verses the Watchtower used in October of 1945, at the time that they were doing their charter. And they said, these verses show that we worship Jesus. So I'm using the same two scriptures that the Watchtower used back then in 1945 in the Watchtower study article. And they've changed their view. And you say, well, the light gets brighter and brighter. Yes, but does what the Watchtower did up and through the 1940s into the early 1950s, what they were doing then, if it's wrong to do it, and it's a disfellowshipping offense, which after the 1990s, it became a disfellowshipping offense. Why was the Watchtower not disfellowshipped? From Russell's day, and he mentioned worshiping Jesus. Rutherford's day, he too, in many of his books of the time that Rutherford wrote of the 1930s, several of them said that you should worship Jesus. Why were they not all disfellowshipped? Right? And then all of a sudden they switched the view, and now it's wrong to worship Jesus, and it is a disfellowshipping offense. Well, it didn't become a disfellowshipping offense for a while. And it was like 1970s, they were kind of still modifying their view. And then by the 1980s, it became a disfellowshipping offense. So that's who I am. And I was expelled after that. And but I continued my search for God. I wanted to know what the Bible really taught. Was the Bible true? Is it false? I had a feeling and a belief that the Bible was true, so I continued that research. And long story short, here I am. I'm elder pastor of a small church in Garner, North Carolina. All right. We are driven by your questions, and I've got a list of questions sent to me by Rick, but we can also find those questions here in this show. If you're watching on Facebook, and I understand that if you go on to, Facebook, I meant YouTube. If you go on to YouTube and go in the search and search for Rick Fearon, Fearon, because this is his 6 Screens network, you can find, I believe, this live channel. And you can come on here, and in the screen, there's a place for live chats, and you can submit live questions right here. Or if you're on the phone, you can call, if you're calling in, and that's the number of 727-731-6701. You can press *6 on your phone and ask your, we'll say, polite question. Let's keep it clean. Let's keep it nice and friendly. Ask your question, and then you say, hey, Jay, I've got a question. And then *6 to mute yourself so we don't get the background noises. All right, so that's what we do here. And as I said, I've got some questions already. So I'm going to go to those questions now. And one of the things that Rick had said at the beginning of the show is to please start out with this question. Now, I just, from the previous show, I heard this comment, and this is not a question. I just want to throw this in from the previous show that we heard on Rick's network about kids being kicked out of the home, minors, those under 18 that are not good, strong witnesses. They do not want to go to meetings. Should we kick them out? Now, I can speak to that. I was a parent back in the early 1980s. And at that time, we had a stepson, older stepson, 15 years old, who said, I'm not going to those meetings anymore. I don't believe this stuff. And the word got out, and the elders approached me and said, Jay, we need to meet with you. So we got in the car back seat, and they said, if one of your children doesn't want to go to meetings, he's out on the street. You need to kick him out of the house for not obeying. And I just thought, this is crazy. I guess people were doing that. I'd heard that some others at that time, I'd been told person to person by an elder who's now passed away, that told me that, yep, he did the right thing, that the faithful slave wanted kids kicked out, and so he did the right thing and kicked his son out of the house because he wouldn't go to meetings anymore. I was shocked, or I was disappointed. I was starting to be not so shocked anymore about the crazy things that they were doing. Then, as I said, two elders came to me and said, yeah, you need to kick out this, your boy, actually a stepson. And I went and talked to my wife at the time and said, they want this boy out. And we both thought that was weird. And she said, no way. And I checked out of the Society's publications, and they, at that time, did not insist they be kicked out. Now, we know since then they've had their dramas where they talk about those who are disfellowshipped may need to be kicked out, but not just for not going out in the meetings. So it was like a practice at that time. But as I looked at the Society's literature, it was not a firm practice. And I called those elders up and I said, no, I've got the Watchtower here that says this, and no, we're not kicking this boy out. And they called me back later and said, it was funny. I don't remember how long we were in the car, half hour, whatever, 45 minutes as they're lecturing me to tell me to toss this boy out. And then I called, I said, no, here's Watchtower articles. Then I got a call back, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes later, and it says, Jay, we've talked amongst us, and we've decided that we would wish to retract everything we said tonight. Just ignore it. Thank you for listening, and you have a nice day. So you pull out the Watchtower Society's materials, and they back down. But these two elders had told me that they were told to tell me to kick the boy out by the circuit overseer. So in the early 1980s, yes, that sure seems like a policy to me. And if you know that the role of the circuit overseer is considered a direct representative of the governing body, that's their official role, as direct representatives. Elders are considered indirect, circuit overseers are considered direct representatives. And he said to kick the boy out, well, that's the rules. And it wasn't until I found the Watchtower's article, told these elders, ain't happening. That's what we say in the South, ain't happening. And they backed off. So interesting. They don't want to contradict the Society's literature. All right, so that's my little comment today. And first up, now at any time, of course, you can, if you're on the phone, do *6 and say, hey, Jay, I've got a question. Or if you go into the YouTube and you find the live show here, you can go to the comments and type in a question there. Or if you are on the video suite, which is at 6screensvideo.myownmeeting.net/room, you'll come here, and it's a free login. There's no cost. You make up any name. You could type in a question there. All right, so we're going to go to this next question. What about the last days? Well, the last days, biblically, there are two meanings to the last days. There's the last days. If we're reading the text in the book of Acts, the last days there, that this was the last days of the covenant, the Jewish covenant. It was coming to an end. There had been the cross, of course, the Pentecost, and God's activities. So it's not too much of a surprise that there would be last days. And in Acts 2:17, Peter is pulling on that verse that, these are the last days. That's one place. Let's see if there's anything, any other references that I can think of. But Hebrews 1:2 says, in these last days he has spoken to us by his son. That's probably one of the clearest ones. What is the last days there in Hebrews 1:2? And the answer is that this is the last days for them for the old covenant, the covenant under Moses being a required covenant that one would need to be in order to be right with God, to be in a holy state, a holy, correct, relationship with God, you needed to be in the Old Covenant under Moses. Well, it was the last days of that in the time of Acts. And if you go on to read in the book of Hebrews, you get to chapter 8, it says that the covenant was passing away and it was near to vanishing. All right. So there is another example of that it is referring to the last days, as the writer of Hebrews says, that last days of something would be the last days of the Jewish system. But otherwise, last days would mean a reference to the end times. We say last days, but actually that it's the end times is a better way to say this. In Matthew 24, of course, is the Jesus Olivet Discourse, and it speaks of the end times. Okay? In Matthew 24, that the coming of the Son of Man, and in those days, and that kind of language, it doesn't call them last days there, but you learn from the context, yeah, that's kind of a last days. So the last days, if you're thinking of referring to the end of the Jewish system, yeah, that is it, of the Jewish system. But if you're thinking of the last days that we would read about in Matthew 24, well, then no, the last days is not the end of the Jewish system. Rather, it is the end times, when or just before the second coming of Christ. So if you go to the Olivet Discourse, that would like be Matthew 24, right? It keeps on referring to those days. Those days will be cut short, the tribulation, and those days the sun will be darkened, et cetera, et cetera. So that doesn't exactly call them, quote unquote, the last days, but it does talk about the days shortly before the second coming of Christ. And that phrase, last days, or the day of the Lord, yes, that does refer to the time period just before the second coming. That would be the time of the tribulation. So yes, in that sense, the last days, biblically speaking, those exact words is referring to the Jewish system, and that indeed has happened. But if we're talking about the end times, in those days, just before the second coming, yes, there are a few Christians who believe that that also has happened. And not just like the Watchtower that would say it happened, 1914 or something like that. But there's a group called the Preterists that hold to an end time view that many of these things that Jesus spoke about, and many of the things that were foretold in the book of Revelation, have already happened. And you're saying, wow, I know I've read some of Revelation, and I sure don't see that as having happened. Well, the preterists would say these are figurative references. But the coming of Christ and him setting up his kingdom and the devil being abyssed, that all happened right around 70 AD, when Jerusalem was torn down, destroyed by Roman armies. The preterist would say, yes, all of that happened at that time. Christians were seated in the heavenlies, from Ephesians, that Jesus returned in a sense. He made us all kings, again from Ephesians chapter 1. So this has already happened. That's a minority view, because as you start looking at the scriptures that say these things, you find out that there's few, and these scriptures have a better explanation than the one they say. That's my opinion. I am not a preterist, so I believe that these things are all yet in the future. Can we be living in those end times? That is certainly possible. I think it's more than possible. I think it's likely, but I can't say for sure. I'm not a prophet. I'm not inspired. But it's as we look at the conditions here at this time that are worldwide, such as the plagues, and people die of it. Now, people would say, challenge and say, wait a minute, it's not the same deadly plagues that were happening 100 years ago. But remember, when the Bible mentions a plague or describes it, whether it's Revelation or in the 10 plagues of Egypt, sometimes no one dies from the plague. Plagues aren't about death. Plagues are about impact to people. So the sky went dark as the 9th plague in Egypt. How many people died from that? I don't know. Possibly just a few, if any. So it's not about how many people die, it's how many people are impacted by the plague. And likewise in the Revelation, in the book of Revelation, some of these plagues, some die, yes, in the description, but some don't. They're just annoyed or in pain. So we don't want to judge that by how many people died. So with the pandemic, it's worldwide. We've got wars in Europe. We've got economic problems worldwide. Countries being deeply affected because of the war in Europe and the restrictions and the COVID and all that, this is similar to the kind of description we would see about the end times, especially in the Olivet Discourse, Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21. Okay, so that's that. I'm going to pause there as I normally do and say, if you've got a question, you can star 6 and say, hey, Jay, I have a question. Or I'm going to...
Jay, I have a question.
All right.
Okay, you said the end times and the last days are the same, right?
They can be. The last days, that phrase...
But the end times or the last days could be the Jewish system of things, but it could apply to the end times, correct?
The end for the Jewish times. Last days is biblically, those words are more about the end of the Jewish system. Those days from Matthew 24, that's the time just before second coming. So I try to be precise. Last days, I don't like that phrase and saying, oh, we are in the last days. I mean, I get that idea, but biblically, that's not the term that we would use, at least in the translations that I use.
Okay, well, are the end times the same as the conclusion of the system of things?
Yes.
Okay, so all those words are almost interchangeable.
Yes. Yes, the end times and the conclusion of the system of things, right.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Yes, sure. And it's important to have that clarified and understood, because it's, that can be quite the puzzle.
And the other thing I wanted to say too, Jay, this is Rick. And I have to tell you that's a great explanation. I learned something. I really, really did learn something. So this preterism, it's not it's in the minority view, obviously, as you said. But in other words, there are people that already believe all of this stuff already has happened. So, I mean, is there any particular denomination that you'd find preterism running rampant?
Yeah, preterist. Yeah, is the term, preterists. Yes, you're right. It's probably preterism. I don't know that it's in a denomination. Not that I've found. It's folks who are probably in what's called the Reformed camp. Probably. I don't know. I've never heard of any getting a closer grouping of who that might be. But I used to go to church with a preterist, and they are in a minority. And as I said, they hold that the last days. Now, the last days, as I said, it's refers to the end times of the Jewish system. Yes. It's also, for example, in 2 Peter 3, their last days refers not to the Jewish system, but to just before the second coming of Christ. So we have just a few references, but it's both ways, and it can be confusing. So I'm going to say a conclusion of the system of things, which we as JEHOVAH'S use to be more specific. That's for witnesses. For evangelicals, they tend to say end times. But the preterists, you just have to kind of run into them or search online. The verses that I've heard them use are a couple verses in the Gospels. But if you look at them closely and check the Greek on it, I'm wondering whether I should go down this path. I'll mention the verse. I'll just mention it. Matthew 26:64. There is a textual issue there. And depending on how you read it, well, I guess we could go look that up. In Matthew 26, what did I say? 26:64. Yes. This is where Jesus is arrested. He's before the high priest. And in most translations, it says this: Jesus said to him, "You have said so." Okay, what are we talking about? His conversation with the high priest. He says in verse 63, the high priest says, "I adjure you before the living God, tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God." Verse 64, Jesus said to him, "You have said so, but I tell you." Here's the question. I tell you, from now on, you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven. And you're going, what? What? How is that possible that the high priest will see him from now on seated at the right hand of power? Did Jesus come? It says coming on the clouds of heaven. So the word coming is there. Did Jesus coming happen at that time? This was just before the cross. This is Matthew 26. So he's crucified right after this. Well, it turns out that there is a textual question there. In verse 64, the words translated now, from now in Greek is two words, ap, RT. Ap is preposition, from now. Or is it the single word, aparti, which means indeed? So we translate this, Jesus saying, "I tell you indeed, you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power." Oh boy. Just two words or one word. There's another one in Matthew 10 at the Transfiguration. I think it's Matthew 10. No, it's not. But it's anyway, it's at the Transfiguration. The question is what did Jesus mean by his statements there when he said that not too many days? Okay, Matthew 17. Yes, Matthew 17. In Matthew 17, not Matthew 10, after verse 1, and after 6 days, Jesus took with them Peter, James, and John. Okay, go up to the high mountain, and he was transfigured. And we want to back up. It's actually just what he said just before the transfiguration. At the end of Matthew 16, let's see. Okay. Let's see, was it Matthew 16 and Matthew 17? Let's double check there. I didn't think I would miss that. It's in the context here when he said, "Not for many days from here you will see the Lord, the Son of Man, coming in the clouds, or coming into his kingdom," which is really weird. Why is that? How is he coming? Let's see. Yes, I was right the first time. At the end of Matthew 16, verse 28. Somehow I missed that. "Truly I say to you, there are some standing here who will not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom." What? They will not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming where? In his kingdom. And the question is, we are thinking, as we read that, we're thinking, wow, that would be his second coming. Well, there's another way of looking at this that most Christians don't realize, that actually this is referring to his first coming. Because right after this, soon after this, Jesus comes to Jerusalem. Remember, Jesus comes to Jerusalem at his final trip just before he's crucified. And there's a verse in Zechariah that says that is his first coming. So Jesus would be saying, under that interpretation, not that you will see him in his second coming, but rather you will not die and you will see Jesus, or the Son of Man, the Messiah, coming in his kingdom, because his first coming in his kingdom, as foretold in Zechariah, was the last week of his life. So it gets kind of complicated there, depending on how you see these two verses, the one in Matthew 16 and then the one in Matthew 26, gives you the possibility that, or the conclusion that preterists say, this all happened at the cross and thereafter. But it's a minority view. And I know I rambled there, Rick. I hope I covered it. It's there are a few verses that they rely upon, and I see what they're saying. But after diving into this, I have a course that I teach on the second coming of Christ. It's about 20 hours long. There's I see no way that the preterist view is what's being said. So that's I don't argue with them. I don't say anything mean about them or look down on them, because they are sincere. They are sincerely seeking the word of God. Okay. Thank you for that question, Rick. I'm going to take a pause here, so allowing someone to say, I have a question. And one of the questions that's typed into the live one is in YouTube, to tell you the truth, why even bother trying to live a Christian life when all family and friends and the rest don't care? What kind of meaning is it to live the religious life in total secularization? Not sure what's being asked there. Why try living to be a Christian life when family and friends don't care? Well, because the Christian life is one, to come to be obedient and to be what we should be ethically in our relationships. And if other people are not going to be ethical, mean, and cruel, I want to have God's ethics. I want to copy Jesus. I want to be loving my neighbor. Why do that? Because it's the right thing to do. And if we run into other people or family or friends who don't really believe in that, okay. But as a believer, I'm going to love my neighbor as myself. And whether someone else likes it or not, I think it's the best way to go. I think that if you put down all the good things about Christianity, loving your neighbor, being kind, loving, living in peace, that's the way to go. That's the way we should be. So I'm going to pause there and see if anybody else has a question. Just *6 and unmute yourself. Okay. Right. I see nothing else from the Six Screens studio. So I'm going to find another question here. What's the next set of questions for me that my brother Rick has sent me? All right. Here's the question. What are the best scriptures to use to help a Jehovah's Witness to leave? Okay, because that'd be an opinion, and some take this question meaning show them scriptures to show that they need to find true Christianity. That could be, but the way this question is worded is, how can I help a witness to leave? regardless of where they go. How do we show them that just being a witness is a problem? And are there some scriptures? Now, there's plenty of stories I've told on this conference call in the past, stories of abuses within the Watchtower. Some of these abuses, you say, well, I've heard people say these abuses, but they're all made up. Even the Watchtower sometimes documents some of the abuses and crazy rules where they've had rules and then they flip and they go completely opposite and then back. And through these rules that they've come up, it has destroyed families. Now, that's not a scripture, so this question is, show me a scripture. Okay, we're going to talk about scripture, but I want to first say is that there are some abuses that have appeared in the Watchtower, things that the Watchtower deliberately caused that led to families being busted up. Rules that they set about whether you could live with a spouse, have children, but not be legally married. You're married in the eyes of Jehovah, you're married in the eyes of the local congregation, maybe, but and you got children, so can you live that way if the spouse is not a believer, not a witness? And they have changed their ruling on that and destroyed families. So I'm not going to go any further in that. I'm not going to mention the Watchtowers that say that. So I'm going to skip and answer the question that was asked. What about scriptures? Okay. So one that come to mind is scriptures that show that the Watchtower has got some really bad things that they believe and teach. Okay. Some of those questions the scriptures have to do with their supposed authority. Now, the Watchtower claims to have the authority to, as you know, they insert words in the New Testament. They claim to be the faithful slave. They claim that you've got to fellowship and view the faithful slave as the faithful slave. Otherwise, you're out in the cold. When I was exiting the Watchtower, some scriptures became really important to me to straighten that mess out. So I'm going to mention 3 of those scriptures here. And I wished in my travels in the Watchtower, some Christian, somebody had showed me these 3 passages. 1 John 4:1, Revelation 2:2, and Galatians chapter 1, 6 through 10. I'm going to read these, and we're going to go through each one and see why they are so powerful. 1 John 4:1. This is out of the English Standard Version. That's pretty good. John writes to somebody. Now, when I was a witness, and I brought out the idea of questioning the society, I had 2 circuit overseers on 2 different occasions tell me that, Jay, something along these lines, Jay, I know the Bereans in Acts 17 were encouraged for testing out what they heard from Paul, but this is what he actually said. He said, but Jay, those Bereans were not baptized yet. See? So you can question the society as long as you're not baptized. And then he says, but once you're baptized, you stop that. So the idea of questioning the society, they claim, has to stop when you're baptized. What do the scriptures say? Okay, 1 John 4:1 says, beloved. Now, who's this written to? Is this written to unbaptized people? No, it's written to people in the congregation. He says, beloved, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see whether they are from God, for many false prophets have gone out into the world. Now, there are other translations that read, I think, in a more clear fashion. The CEV, Contemporary English Version, reads this way. Dear friends, don't believe everyone who claims to have the Spirit of God. Test them all. to find out if they really do come from God. Many false prophets have already gone out into the world. Now that's the CEV, a Contemporary English Version.
Can I
CEV.
say something to you, brother?
Say again?
Can I
What?
say something?
Yes, you can say something. Go
What
for it.
what you just said earlier blew my mind, because when you said about the Bereans, I brought that up to an elder, and that was the exact words he said. He told me, "You're baptized." They were not. I thought I was bringing a point out that was like, if you're asking, the Bereans were considered honorable people. They were
Right.
testing and making sure what they were learning was truth. And he goes, "Daniel, they weren't baptized yet. You are. You already know the truth." And it did not hit me until years later. The scripture where Jesus says, "You're now a free people. Be careful you don't allow your yokes to be enslaved again." I
Yes,
might be not repeating it exactly
it's
for word
close.
for word.
Galatians 5.
I made that connection, is that the Watchtower, you don't get no free pass. Your only free pass is if you're lucky to start asking questions, serious questions, before you're baptized. Once
Right.
you get baptized, they won't give you any slack. I'm lucky I didn't get disfellowship for apostasy, because the way I was asking questions, I thought I was safe. But anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt your show. I just thought it was fascinating what you said about the Bereans, because that's what I was told too.
Wonderful. I am so glad you interrupted me, because I thought it was coincidental that two circuit overseers said it and you told me the same story. I believe, if I remember right, I think that it appeared in some older Watchtower, and the circuit overseers must have been drilled on this, because once, twice, but three times, that's not a coincidence. That's planned. So they must have been drilled on, what do you say when someone wants to test the Watchtower? And the answer is, you got to point out that they're baptized. So you got to stop that. And I remember when I heard the circuit overseer said, "Well, now that you're baptized, you got to stop that." I was just thinking, that's crazy. How did I get into this religion where the distinction is the moment?
The same thing. I was thinking the same thing to myself, because you go from a standpoint. I don't know about yourself, but I was born in, and so when I was a little boy, I had lots of doubts. Things just didn't feel right. But you were always taught, if you have doubts, that's Satan. And then as you get a little bit older, say I get into my preteens, you hear about the Bereans. I'm thinking, well, they could ask questions. They could do this and that. And they were honorable to God. They were honorable people. And I thought to myself, well, I can barely talk to my own parents without, and I know I can't go to the elders, elders act like they're there as like a priest, or, you got questions, you're struggling spiritually, come to us. It depends on what you're going to them for. You know what I mean? If you are a thinker, I don't know what you would call it. You just maybe you start to become awake, and you go and start asking questions to the elders. You've done slit your throat.
That's right.
Unless you get lucky, and an elder, maybe that is a friend of the family or something, where they don't want to. They'll just tell your parents, "Hey, you need to, get him to shut up," or something.
Right.
You don't have that freedom that you think you do, and then that's the scary part of it. Is we grew up thinking it's okay. Yes, we got to be careful of our doubts, but hey, if you got questions, you can go to the elders. You can do this and that. I didn't experience that, and I learned the hard way. And I knew from that point on, if I had any issues, I wouldn't even go to my parents. I would just either go to prayer or research it myself in the scriptures and compare other translations, because I realized you couldn't trust really, and this is sad to say, you can't, in the organization, if your family's in it, you can't trust your family or the elders. You really have to search deep inside yourself and do your own homework, because your family will throw you into the fire just as the elders would. I'm sorry to say it like that.
Oh, so true. They'll throw you under the bus. Yes. I'm going to read some more of these different translations, but I'm going to talk that I'm also going to comment about asking sincere questions and what can happen to you. So I want to do two things. So 1 John 4:1-2 through by the Christian Standard Bible, CSB, reads similarly. It says this: Dear friends, who's it addressed to? Friends, not unbaptized Bereans, but dear friends in the congregation that John was writing. So here it says, Dear friends, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see if they are from God. So that's kind of a standard one there. Then let's see. Did I read? I think I read CEV, Contemporary English Version, and Contemporary English, Christian English Bible. Dear friends, don't believe every spirit, but test the spirits, right? Dear friends, don't believe everyone who claims to have the Spirit of God. That was the CEV. Let's see. I've got a list here. Good News Translation says, My dear friends, do not believe all who claim to have the Spirit. Right. Let's see what else here. All right, so I guess anyway, that's a good verse there to use, and that was kind of a main verse that set me free. Another one, Revelation 2:2. Now, this in a red letter Bible, it tells you this is Jesus' words. And what does Jesus say? Revelation 2:2. He says, "I know your works, your toil, and your patient endurance, and you cannot bear with those who are evil, but have tested those who call themselves apostles and are not, and found them to be false." So I love it that Jesus says, you tested out these people who claim to be apostles, which means sent forth ones, and you found them to be false. Good for you. So what does Jesus say? Test them out. Another one, Galatians 1:6-10. And this is testing out those who would claim to be, say, prophets or whatever. Galatians 1:6-10, Paul says, I am astonished that you are so quickly deserting him who called you in the grace of Christ and are turning to a different gospel. Not that there is another one, but there are some who trouble you and want to distort the gospel of Christ, which is something the Watchtower does. We who know better. But should we test them? Well, let's keep reading verse 8. But even if we or an angel from heaven should preach to you a gospel contrary to the one we preach to you, let him be accursed. If that wasn't enough, he says it again. As we have said before, so now I say again, if anyone is preaching to you a gospel contrary to the one you received, let him be accursed. Then he adds in verse 10, for am I now seeking the approval of man or of God? Or am I trying to please man? If I were still trying to please man, I would not be a servant of Christ. What's the message here? The message is, it is not only good to test these folks out, it's something you must do. And if what they're teaching conflicts with what you see in Scripture, okay, these are bad guys. So you need to walk away from them. So that's one of the verses that set me free, is to see that we are encouraged to test them out to see if they have the Spirit of God. And what does the Watchtower claim to be? That they're anointed, that they have the Spirit of God, and you don't. okay, if they claim that, you have to test them out. And they fail the test, we have permission to walk away. I remember there was an old book called Qualified to Be Ministers, called the QM book. And in there, I think it was in the 1950s, and it had a quote. And it said, yes, John says we should test out, but of course that doesn't mean testing out the faithful slave, because they're chosen by God. So there the Watchtower will contradict these scriptures that tell us to test them out. Okay, so that's one question that I would ask or bring out these scriptures I just mentioned on the authority of a religion, because the Bible defines how much authority they have based on these scriptures. It's not very much authority, and if anybody claims more than that, walk away. Another passage I want to read, because these are such an important question. The question is, how do we help a witness to leave? Another passage, my all-time favorite, Romans chapter 14, on into chapter 15, 1 through 6. Now, I, in my church, have done a whole sermon on just this. It takes an hour. I'm not going to do that. But if you go through Romans 14, and my wife, when she was exiting the Watchtower, she wasn't my wife at the time, came across Romans 14. I came across Romans 14. In fact, if you look for the Watchtower quoting Romans 14, it almost never does. Because Romans 14, the whole chapter, just unravels the authority of the Watchtower. The first verse says, as for the one who is weak in faith, welcome him, but not to quarrel over opinions. That's the headliner. Don't quarrel over opinions. And as you go through the chapter, you find out it means opinions on things that really don't matter, things that are not essential, things that aren't essential to salvation, things that are not fundamental. Please don't be quarreling over these things. Let it go. Well, the things the Watchtower finds to quarrel over. Well, they quarrel over, they'll tell you, and if you differ with them, there's a quarrel. Whether at a public gathering when they play the national anthem, do you stand and not sing, or do you sit instead of stand? All sorts of rules. Or can you feed, if you have a farm animal or some kind of animal that likes to eat live food, and that food has blood in it, can you do that? All these little bitty things. Can you play chess or not? That was a quarrel for years. According to Romans 14, we do not do that. This is Paul's advice. So the Watchtower has to be very careful in quoting Romans 14, because it talks about exercising your conscience and following your conscience. And you can be different. In fact, that's what this whole chapter in Romans 14 is. You can be different and you can believe differently, and you're okay with God. So the Romans 14 unravels what the Watchtower teaches. And it takes a while to get that, but especially if you look at what the Watchtower said in Romans 14, they rarely get into it. Okay, another passage that I think is good to know that challenges the Watchtower. This is John 13, 34 and 35. We know that verse. Watchtower mentioned it about having love amongst yourselves. Here's what the verse says. A new commandment. A new what? A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also are to love one another. By this, all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. All you got to do is listen to Rick's show and listen to these experiences of people being abused. We heard earlier, I think it was Anne-Marie, where as a child, and not a little, necessarily little child, any child that'd be wrong, is they beat their children if they won't go to meetings, or they'll kick them out and put them out in the street. Is that love? Or is it conditional on total obedience to the Watchtower? There are so many cases of people who are innocent, who are disfellowshipped and shunned I remember one years ago on a public radio station where they have a call-in show, and this would have been in the early 70s, I think, or maybe in the between the it would have been after 75 and before 19 it could have been in the 1980s. Come to think of it, no, it would have been I think it was more like prior to 1977, now that I think of it. Nope. Prior to 1987. Sorry, just trying to pick up the time. That public radio show between 77 and 87, where a gal calls in and she has a long conversation, and it's like a show. I think it was a show just dedicated to her. And she was a Jehovah's Witness, ex-Jehovah's Witness. And she was desperately trying to become a witness again. She was disfellowshipped for revealing her husband as a wife beater, who was a ministerial servant. And he was a wife beater. And she revealed to some in the congregation that he was a wife beater. And she was disfellowshipped for slander, because she could not prove it with 2 eyewitnesses that he'd be beaten on her and in front of 2 people watching this. So she went to a friend in the Kingdom Hall and said, "My husband beats me." Now she's saying this on a public radio station, one of these call-in shows where they broadcast it over the area, and this would have been the Bay Area in San Francisco. And that she told to a friend because she didn't know what to do, and she was hurting, she was sad, she was emotionally destroyed, and she told a friend. You know what the grounds for being disfellowshipped are? No, I'm asking you. Do you know what those rules are? She didn't think it through. If you tell a friend in the congregation who's not an elder of something serious, and you can't prove it beyond a doubt, in the Watchtower's rule book, that's slander. So she told a friend told someone else, got back to the elders, and they said, "Well, we have testimony that you told somebody that your husband beats you." She goes, "Yes, he beats me." She says, "Well, can you prove it?" "Well, no, I can't. I've had these bruises." "Well, you must have walked into a wall or something." And she's disfellowshipped. She appeals and still is denied, and she's out. So the only thing she could think of was to go on a public radio show and ask the governing body for mercy, like the governing body is going to listen to a radio show out in California. Anyway, that made big news on the public radio. Why? Because they do not have love amongst themselves. It's a brutal, evil setup there. One last one I'm going to mention. John chapter 5, 22 through 23. I found this very effective. This is the one I mentioned earlier that the Watchtower used 1945, October 1945 Watchtower, to show that we should worship Jesus. Here's what the verse says. "For the Father judges no one, but has given all judgment to the Son." Now, my translation starts with the word "that," the next verse, "that." So why does the Father judge no one and given all the judgment to the Son? Verse 23, "That all," who? All, "may honor the Son." How much? "Just as they honor the Father." And if you look this up in the Kingdom Interlinear or any Greek text, that word "just as" is there. And you know what the word "just as" there means? Just as, exactly as. So it says all may honor the Son just as they honor the Father. And then it says whoever does not honor the Son does not honor the Father who sent him. So if, and this, again, this is the message for all, if someone does not honor the Son just as they honor the Father, it's like you're not honoring the Father, and this is trouble. So the question is, does the Watchtower teach all the people? Is it in the Watchtower? Is it in the Awake? Is it in their message that they go door to door with, that all should honor the Son. How much? Just as they honor the Father. Now, this is not teaching that the Son is the Father. Same as the scriptures say, honor your father and mother. It doesn't mean your father is your mother or that your mother is also the father. These are distinct persons, but how much do you honor them? The same. Now, when it says honor your father and mother, do you honor your mother as the father, as your father? Well, no, I don't honor my father as if he were my mother, but we are to honor them both. And according to this, we are to honor the Son just as they honor the Father. And that was the Watchtower's point in 1945. So does the Watchtower do that? The answer is no, and they stay away from those verses. So this, in my opinion, are the some of the best verses to show that one should leave the Watchtower. Then there, of course, is a much larger set of scriptures to show where you should go after you leave the Watchtower. And that's, of course, is just a zillion of those things, verses as well as quotes from Watchtower saying such crazy things that they have over the years. Okay, I'm going to pause there and allow someone to *6, or going to take a look at our YouTube channel. Let's see if I can spot any questions here. Some folks are talking to each other. Okay. Or you can *6 and unmute yourself. All right. I'm checking out here. Sorry, just take a pause here.
Yeah, hello, Jay.
Yeah, I'm just looking for questions. All right.
No, that's good. No, I just want to come in and say hello, man. I'm listening to the program. You're really doing a great job today. Yeah, the scriptures trying to get people out of the Watchtower, those are good scripture that you use. Those are sensible. That gets people at least thinking. I mean, I always thought about the one about honoring your mother and father. And the Watchtower does a lousy job with that. They really, really do. But no, I'm really listening here closely today. I'm finding that we're getting a lot more people listening in lately too, Jay. So that's a good thing. And you're reaching a lot of people on YouTube. Have you checked the YouTube comments? A lot on there. Yeah.
Yes, there's some discussion there. I didn't spot any actual questions yet. If you, as I'm talking, I can't be reading at the same time. But if you come across any questions or can produce a question, that would be great.
Yeah. Well, that's what I was going to tell you. I'm monitoring Facebook and YouTube, and if there's anything on there that I see kind of very good to be able to bring into the program here today, I'm going to do it. Okay.
Great. Thank you.
Yep.
All right. Next question. Does the Bible use the term governing body, or at least suggest it? And the answer is no, it doesn't use a governing body. And the Watchtower trying to find something that they can point to the governing body it's the only one place that they go to, and that's Acts 15. Here's the point that can be puzzling. As you read Acts 15, it sounds like they are a governing body. Well, there is a problem here, because what do you mean in your mind about governing body? Do you imagine that it means like a pope? That it means someone with a lot of authority? How much authority? That makes all the difference in the world. For example, let's say, over here I have a governing body for this church, and they decide what time to start the church and what time to stop it. Okay, now that is authority, but it's not anything near what the Watchtower claims. Watchtower claims to have a lot more authority than just telling you what time to start your meeting. What the Watchtower means is that they're governing, and they govern a lot of things. They have all kinds of authority. In fact, at some point it becomes absolute. When I was in my judicial committee trial, And these elders were not the local elders of the congregation, the Kingdom Hall. These elders had been chosen out of a whole district because since I was associated with the writing department, they could not trust the local elders. They had to have a special elders judicial committee set up by the governing body. And in there, the question came up, the other witnesses that were there testifying against me that I had indeed worshiped Jesus. They said, well, but isn't the Bible the final authority? And one of those elders spoke up immediately. He says, well, yes, but the faithful slave is the final authority on the Bible. By those few words, you see what authority has been handed the governing body, the faithful slave. They have the authority of God's word, the Bible itself, because they are the final authority, he said, on the Bible. And of course, normally we'd say the Bible is the final authority. And I was shocked. And of course, that's why I remembered it so well. I was absolutely shocked. That's the question. Is there such a concept in the Bible of someone who has that kind of authority? And the answer is no. That concept is not there. Is there a concept of someone having some authority? Sure. Elders have some authority. You can get that out of reading 2 Timothy. But 1 Corinthians says we have the authority to get married. Okay. But the governing body requires more authority. So if you go through the Bible looking to see who has authority, you'll find out the Bible itself will limit how much authority people have. Most of those verses are in the Old Testament. We see how much authority Aaron had in Exodus 32 when he said, let's throw this gold in and this calf came on out. Did Aaron have the authority to direct worship to this golden calf? Read Exodus 32, and the answer is no. He got in trouble, and those that did build the golden calf were punished. Uh-oh. All right, another one, Numbers chapter 20. Moses was supposed to speak to a rock and get water out of it. Well, he didn't do exactly what he should have done and did not give glory to God. So what did God say? Well, Moses, you've got this kind of authority, so I let you do that. No, that's not what God said to Moses. He says, because you did that, there's no do-over, and you do not get to go into the promised land. Oh, okay. All right. Anyway, the authority of people in the Old Testament is limited. Now, I'm going to give you one of my favorites, and this is really funny. If I can find the Watchtower article, it's easy to search. I just didn't have it and pick it up in time. If you search the Watchtower index for the word Rechabites, this is funny. It's based on the verse in Jeremiah 35, 1 through 19. And as you know, the Watchtower likes to read itself into the pages of the Bible, that they are the fulfillment of something, okay? And they read themselves into this explanation that they represent the Jeremiah class. As I said, I can't remember the exact Watchtower, but it would have been in the early 80s, I think. There in Jeremiah 35, 1 through 19, it speaks of the Rechabites, who are not Jews. And this was at a time, of course, where Israel, Judah, is being very bad and disobedient. And they've broken their covenant with God. So God says to Jeremiah, now who's Jeremiah? He's a prophet. Does he have authority? Yes, he does. And God says to Jeremiah, I want you to go to the Rechabites and tell them to come on inside and have a glass of wine. Now you're saying, okay, what's the big deal? Well, the big deal is that the Rechabites had a covenant that was accepted by under the law that they would never drink wine. They would always dwell in tents and never drink wine. So the prophet Jeremiah comes up and says, you need to come on in here and drink wine. And the Rechabites disobeyed. They're not doing it. They're not having it. And to paraphrase the rest, God says to the Rechabites through Jeremiah, because you disobeyed my prophet Jeremiah, I will have to bless you forever. This is one of the most interesting verses that limit how much authority people think they have and how much they actually have. And here's the funny part. In the Watchtower article, it says that this shows the society or the faithful slaves' role, and in that that this is predicting the and showing the role of a later faithful slave, the Watchtower Society. And I remember one witness, a brother, told me, he says, I thought it was so funny. He says, because that means that somehow this is a prediction that someday the Watchtower would exercise too much authority and go off the rails and tell people to do something that's wrong. And that's what the paragraph was implying. I'll have to find that someday. It's hilarious. But it shows the limit of, for God's representatives, what the limit of the authority that they really have. They don't have all that much. They can tell you what time to start the meeting, turn on the lights, whatever. But as far as an authority to tell you what you got to do and what to believe and what's right and what's wrong, no. And here's a little illustration. As Christians, our role, or even elders in the church, our role is to be good attorneys in learning the law, learning the rules, and explaining them, and good teachers. We are not judges. That's a different job. So it is not our job to be like the judge to decide, okay, you're guilty, you're innocent. That is not our job. We are to be good attorneys. So therefore, we have in Matthew chapter 7, Jesus says, don't judge others. You read in 1 Corinthians end of 4 into 5 and into 6 that you can judge the actions of people. And if a person decides that they don't want to be part of the congregation, okay, or they don't want to hold that Jesus is Lord, okay, then you really don't want to be in our fellowship. But that's the extent of it. According to 1 Corinthians 5, you know who carries out the judgment? If you read the text, it's the devil who carries out the judgment on those who are sinners. Right. Isn't that interesting? So the point being is that how much authority does the Watchtower have? Is there a governing body that has that much authority? And the answer is no. They do not. But the Watchtower will go to Acts 15. And Acts 15 is the story, the true story of how there was a question about should a person be circumcised? Do we need to get a person into the old law covenant of Moses, et cetera, et cetera? So they go to the conference or council in Jerusalem. And Paul shows up. And, of course, Peter's there. And oh, this is interesting. Okay. And what's the decision? They talk about things, and they said, well, we're not going to add any more burdens to the Gentiles. Okay. That's Acts 15:28. Not going to add any more burdens. Unlike the Watchtower that just likes to keep on adding those burdens. Then when you compare that with Galatians, and in there, now, some would question whether this is precisely the same meeting, but whatever the meeting is, you can skip Acts 15, because that's the verse, of course, where the Watchtower says, this is a governing body. Well, these people there are a council, and they are including elders, and this is their advice about how to deal in areas where there's Gentile Christians dealing with Jewish or potential, or they're Jews who are potentially Christians. How should they relate? And the answer is, okay, you should do these things for the sake of conscience. Well, yeah, that makes sense. In fact, Paul says that very same thing in 1 Corinthians chapters 8 through 10. But as far as telling people what they need to believe, well, they do need to believe the gospel, and at that time, much of it was oral. But as far as coming up with their own stuff, no. Unless you were inspired, unless you could heal someone, no, you did not have that kind of authority. But let's take a look at Galatians 2. Oh my. This is the passage that set me free from the Watchtower. One of the passages, Galatians 2. Verse 1, starting there, it says, "Then after 14 years I went up again to Jerusalem with Barnabas, taking Titus along with me. I went up because of a revelation." Now, it doesn't say he went up because he had to submit to the Watchtower. "I went up because of a revelation and set before them." Who's them? Well, it goes on to say, "though privately before those who seemed influential." So he went privately to tell these ones in Jerusalem, which would be the elders and such in Jerusalem. It says, "the gospel that I proclaim among the Gentiles, in order to make sure I was not running or had not run in vain." And I puzzled over that word vain. Why did Paul go to Jerusalem? Yes, there was a vision, but he wanted to make sure that he had not running in vain. Okay, what does that mean? Now, the Watchtower twists that to say that Paul went there to check it out to make sure that he was understanding things right. No, that's not what this is about. This is about Paul was preaching a gospel, a message to the Gentiles, and he was concerned that his work would be nullified by the Jerusalem believers, because his message to the Gentiles was that you do not need to be circumcised. But if the Jerusalem believers were to promote what they felt, which was that you do need to be circumcised, this would make Paul's message of no import, no power, or in vain. That's what the word vain, in vain, means when you go from Greek to English. And read the context, and you'll see what he's saying. Verse 3, "But even Titus, who was with me, was not forced to be circumcised, though he was a Greek." See, Paul had been preaching, you don't need to be circumcised, but he wanted to go check out what the Jerusalem folks are doing, so that this would not nullify what he had been preaching, because the Jerusalem folks had what? From verse 2, he says, "those who seemed influential." So he's referring to those leaders as being those who were pillars in the church. Okay, keep reading. Verse 4, "Yet because of false brothers secretly brought in, who slipped in to spy out our freedom that we have in Christ Jesus, so that they might bring us into slavery, to them we did not yield in submission." What? "To them we did not yield in submission even for a moment." So he didn't reveal to these other Christians who were pushing the Judaizer agenda that you had to be circumcised. He says he didn't yield so that the truth of the gospel might be preserved for you. And then verse 6, "And from those who seem to be influential," you see that term again? These would be the apostles or elders in Jerusalem. He says, "and those who seem to be influential," okay, that's the same term in verse 2, "and those who seemed influential, seemed to be influential," and then he says, "what they were makes no difference to me." And you underline that phrase, "they made no difference to me." How much authority did Paul give to these guys that were influential in Jerusalem? Go up to a governing body member as a JEHOVAH and say, "what you are makes no difference to me," and find out how quick you're going to get your head slapped, and you're going to be for a judicial committee. But that's what Paul just said. Who these people were make no difference. Why? Because we're all brothers in Christ. We're all part of the temple of God. We all have equal authority. Now, we have made different commissions, So elders in the church have one commission, teachers have another commission. They have commissions to do things. But as far as authority to tell people what they believe, no way. And he says, God, and the rest of verse 6 says, God shows no partiality. Those, I say, who seemed influential added nothing to me. What did they add? Nothing. Let's read on and see just who Paul was speaking about. Let's see if we have some names here, those who seemed influential. Let's keep reading. Verse 7, on the contrary, when they, that's these persons who were influential, they saw that I had been entrusted with the gospel to the uncircumcised, just as Peter had been entrusted with the gospel to the circumcised. Verse 8, for he who worked through Peter for his apostolic ministry to the circumcised worked also through me for mine to the Gentiles. And, here it is, verse 9, and when James and Cephas, now that's Peter. Peter would have been one of the governing body, and James would have too. So when James, and we could just insert governing body if that's what, they were the ones that were leaders in the congregation. It says, and these, I'll just insert the word governing body, who seemed to be pillars, perceived the grace that was given to me. They gave the right hand of fellowship to Barnabas and me, that we should go to the Gentiles and they to the circumcised. So according to Paul here, they're the ones that added nothing to him, and he doesn't care of who they are. They mean nothing to me. They seem to be pillars, meaning they seem to have influence. But it didn't make them a governing body that could tell you what to believe or to decide if you were even in the congregation. Not so. So Galatians 2, these first few verses, unravel the Watchtower's claimed authority as being of the governing body. I love verse 10. It says, only they asked us to do what? Go out and serve us more. No, it says, remember the poor, the very thing I was eager to do. Is that what the Watchtower emphasizes? I don't think so. Okay. We're going to pause for a minute, see if anybody has any questions. Just *6 and unmute yourself. We'll take a moment here to see if there are any questions here. Okay, I guess nothing there in the YouTube list, nothing on the video studio. So if anybody has a question, it's okay. Next question. Is the governing body aware of the deception they teach? Now this is interesting stuff. There is an ex-witness by the name of Alan Fearon. He actually flew into Raleigh one time, came and spent a couple hours over at my house. I just found out that he just passed away just a couple months ago. He's my age. But if you read about Alan Fearon as an ex-witness, I remember when he was there, he says he wanted to drop by some photocopies of his research, and it was like a box full of pages on everything. Alan was not a believer. He was not a follower of Christ, but he sure knew how to expose the Watchtower. But he told me of a conversation then, and I've seen it written up elsewhere, that he had a friend of the family. Okay? He had a friend of the family, which was Albert Schroeder. I think that's the name, who was a governing body. And he had a phone call. He, in this write-up where he talks about his life and his research, he had, there's a write-up where he talks about Schroeder, who is a governing body member, Albert Schroeder, and he had multiple conversations with him. Now, Alan, in my office there in my house told me some details. I don't know if they're written up anywhere. But he had this conversation with the governing body member because he was a person. Schroeder was a personal friend of the family, or a personal friend of someone, of a friend in his family. So through these connections, he got a hold of Schroeder, governing body, had a phone conversation, and he is asking these really tough questions of this governing body member. And finally, as I remember the story, Schroeder cuts him off and he says, "Listen, kid, it is our job as governing body to decide what the truth is, and then it's your job to go door to door teaching it." And that's, best I remember, like a word for word quote in what Alan Feuerbacher writes up in some of these online things you can find about this in this conversation with Schroeder. He needles the governing body members with these inconsistencies, contradictions, contradicting scripture, all of this. And Schroeder has no answer. And of course, Alan asks only the tough ones. He asks a lot of tough questions, handfuls and handfuls of good questions. And Schroeder has no answer, and finally refuses to take Alan's call anymore because he's got no answer. And this is governing body, GB. They're considered to be the top. No, they had no answer whatsoever. So do they know that they don't have the answers? Of course. Well, then how is it that they get to get by with this? The question was, do they understand the deception? I have, when I was writing for the society or contributing, would talk to another writer, and he would say, yeah, the Watchtower does know that, there's difficulties, He says they know about the Old Testament story about the false prophet who apparently God used in a bit, but the false prophet was still a false prophet. The Watchtower knows about these stories, but they do not talk about them in print. They know of the difficulties. Now, I can't get in their mind, but from what I understand and what I believe is that they are so self-pumped up, so feeling so self-important, that they really believe this garbage that they teach, that they have that authority. They are the channel God is using, and okay, God makes mistakes, but so what? We are the channel. We just don't tell anybody. We certainly don't want to do it on the Australian Royal Commission and tell anybody that we believe we are the governing body. Shh, let's keep that a secret. But internally, they believe this, and they insist that you do too. And they talk about themselves like they were a prophet, and you better treat them like they are. And as they told Alan, it's their job as the governing body to figure out what the truth is, and it's the witness's job to take it door to door. I'll pause there for a second. I see. Hello?
Is it okay if I make a comment?
Yes, make a comment.
I think I said this last night on the 6 screens to somebody, I can't remember who, but it's kind of scary when you look at it. So I turned 50 in April of this year. When I was a kid growing up, my dad started partaking when I was around 12, 13, and he was only in his 40s, somewhere in there. But I didn't know. I heard of Fred Friends, but I couldn't if you were to set me down, or if my dad was to set me down and says, name all the governing body, I couldn't have told you that. I couldn't even told you what they look like. It's because it wasn't, they were more in the background. My point in this is my daughter is 12. She can name every one of the governing body members, and she's met a couple of them. Stephen Lett was one. They met at an assembly. It was right before COVID hit. And it was like a celebrity. My daughter just brags about it. It's like she got her picture taken with him, and others were coming up and getting their picture taken. And it's like they're freaking celebrities. And we were taught, like, if back in when I was a teenager, if you had a Michael Jackson poster or a Prince poster on your wall, that was like worship. But my daughter could have her picture taken with Stephen Lett and have it in a picture frame and have it on their wall. What is it's ironic how they've adapted and changed to actually being more like the churches. They're getting more into emotionalism. And that's something my mom told me when I was about 18 is the difference between us and other religions. They're into emotionalism, and that's not healthy for your relationship with God, because it's all about emotions. It needs to come strictly from the heart or whatever. Look what the Watchtower has switched things up to. They use videos and they play a song in the background. What is that doing? It's bringing you in using emotionalism. It's just ironic. I know it might not quite fit what you're talking about, but I just wanted to bring that up.
Yeah, good. Yes. The emotion, the sensationalism, their celebrities, that is just so funny. So true. Yeah, when I was growing up, I had no idea. I mean, I heard the name Franz, but I couldn't, and Nathan nor we had a picture, but I had no idea. Now, they are public figures. They have the studio production. I also think this is a dumb idea for them, because now if you happen to see one of them on the Australian Royal Commission, you're going, it's not just audio, your video. You're going, oh, wow, that is him. And when he says, oh, we're not, we're not the faithful slave. Wait a minute. Uh-oh. Did he think that he was going to be on YouTube?
Right. It's a joke. They've got themselves. It's kind of smart at the same time what they've done, because they're starting to look more like other churches to some extent. They're still a cult, but they're trying to lure people. And if you really think about it, as how desperate they are to continue on, they have to be able to figure out a way to hit the youth, because that would be the generation that keeps it going on. But that's the struggle where they're at, is they're dealing with pedophilia. They're dealing with the internet. So you're being exposed on so many different levels. And yet they're desperately trying to survive. In reality, it's going to be the kids, because that's what, as they get older and they encourage them to be elders or ministerial servants or pioneers or whatever, that's what keeps it going on. The older people, are passing away. And so I see the Watchtower in a very desperate time right now. And I imagine they're probably scared in ways, because they are being exposed. And how do you get rid of this pedophilia when it's being brought out right in the open? And that's not even discussing scriptures. That's not even looking where they twisted scriptures, where people are waking up. So they got so much against them right now. I only pray and hope for all of our sakes and all of our families that are still in, that light continues to expose the darkness, and they go down. I mean, Rick says they're falling down, that it's going down, and I want to believe that with all my heart. But these people are trickery. They've existed a long time through a lot of different stuff, and so I only hope and pray that they fall down. I hope that they get exposed completely for where they're at, I have a feeling, and this is just my opinion only, with the news, if you look at the media and you're listening to the news and they're talking about 87,000 armed IRS people. I was thinking about this the other day. I was like, that's crazy. Why don't they put those 87,000 on the border and protecting the border? But then I started thinking, I go, wait a minute, whoa, what would that do to the Watchtower? What if if the IRS is getting aggressive in that sense, that they're going to hire or put 87,000 armed people, employees for the IRS? What does the Watchtower have to fear about that? I don't know if they have anything to fear about it, but it just kind of made me think that if they're going to get this persistent, they're going to go after people with money. They're not going to go after somebody who owes taxes that's, broke or not, they're just, they don't make very much money. They're going to be going after corporations, after big, where they can get the big money. And I wonder if the Watchtower is shaking in their boots right now. I know I threw a lot out there. I apologize.
Well, it's very good, because we all curious about the governing body. And as Rick has said on his show, some of these social media sites that years ago had a few thousand, and now it's tons of people that are ex-witnesses exposing the Watchtower. And I follow like about 25 different Facebook pages dealing with ex-witnesses, and every now and then you'll see another voice, another person saying, yep, I've just decided to leave the Watchtower. I left the Watchtower a couple months ago. There are people left and right getting out, and I don't think they're baptizing them as fast. So they are losing, they are getting out, and the number just keeps going up. You don't find them going back into the Watchtower. This number of ex-witnesses is climbing faster than the number of witnesses are, I think. So yeah, they're going to have their day in court. All right. Question about
yeah. Go ahead, please.
I would go on to something else. So let's finish. What did you ask, sir, brother?
I'm sorry. If you're running out of time and you need to continue on, please do. I don't want to keep interrupting you.
No, go on with before I move on to a different topic. So give me what you got. What you thinking?
Okay, so I've been on 6 screens for, I lose track, a number of years. So let's just say that not as long as some people. But here's my question to you. When people, you got people of all different ages, male, female, whatever, whether they were brought in or raised in it their whole entire life, or some came in it later, but either way, it's kind of the same experience. As you realize you've been duped. You realize, and so I think when you leave, at that point you question everything. Like, my God, I mean, I thought this was, I was born in and I thought this was the truth and everything else is false. People out there are going to treat you terrible. And then you leave and you lose your family, you lose everything. And then you realize, wow, there's people out there that give the shirt off their back for you.
Yes.
And they're not even Christian, or they could be Christian. It's either or. They're just good people out there that
right.
we were taught that wasn't. So my question is to try to circle this back around is, how can we help people? How do I say this? When people come out of the Watchtower and you hear, say you hear somebody's experience on 6 screens, and or whatever.
Uh-oh. Did we lose the connection? We're just getting to the question too. All right. When our brother comes back, maybe he'll just unmute and tell me what the question was. But the question started out as, oh, what about, oh, there we are, lost the signal. What can we do to help people? And he says, those that maybe come out of the Watchtower, whatever. I'm going to guess what he's asking.
Well, okay, we'll get him right back on again. What happens is every 6 hours, the program shuts down from the telephone line. So we're going to get that going right now. So hang in with us. Give us a couple of seconds. They only give us 6 hours in the conference call. So that's been shut down.
Welcome into the live 6 Screens conference calls. We thank you for joining in. To speak up and talk, press *6 on your telephone.
So just give it a second, but great program so far, Jay. You're doing a good job out there, and we really appreciate it. And we just got to get this phone, and then we'll bring Daniel back in. Yep.
We hope you enjoy tonight.
Okay.
You will now be placed into the conference.
If you are the host, please.
All right.
Yeah, we'll get him right back in here, so don't you worry, Jay. It's a lot of technical stuff going on, so we'll have him right back in. Give it a second.
All right.
If you do not know your PIN, please enter pound or hash. Thank you. There are 6 participants in the conference.
So we've got a few people. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Daniel.
No, I was asking him, how do we help people that have left the Watchtower to truly heal? What can we do to help them not go through, say, you have 10 years pass, and it's like you were, in their mind, they're on a loop cycle because the pain, the trauma, all of the stuff that they experience. How can we truly help people move forward and realize they can go after their dreams now? They're free. They can go back to school. They can, or do whatever they want to do. How do we help people after the Watchtower? That's what I'm asking him. If he has any advice or anything like that, because I see people stuck. You talk to people and sometimes you think, oh, they just left the Watchtower, and they're like, oh no, I've been out 20 years.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? It's like, how do we help people? And I'll shut up now. I'm sorry.
Good. No, that is probably one of the top questions that need to be asked. And I have my answer, and I truly believe in it. The difficulty is that we live in a world of information, and we have someone who's needing help, and suppose they put out a request on social media and I need help, and they get 10,000 people answering, well, let me help you. Sadly, the person who needs help doesn't know who to choose to help him through this path. And well, I'll give you my answer, and I hope people hear it. But for me, I needed, first of all, to have friends. I need to know that there are kind, loving people who are like Jesus. And sadly, there's not a lot of persons that are truly consistently helpful and loving. There are so many that are caught up, maybe religious or not, that have got some things going that aren't always that friendly and kind, consistently kind. But to be a friend, start there. And then I, of course, am a believer in the Bible and in Jesus. And so my answer goes beyond just being a friend, but I want them to know what they should have heard, what the real truth is. Now, not a lot of people can do what I do. I understand that, because I've studied some Hebrew. I've studied more Greek than I have Hebrew, and I have access to manuscripts, online manuscripts, and all this kind of stuff, and explain how the Bible was produced and how the Watchtower has twisted it. But if we can direct people and at least tell them that there are answers, and ask them to organize their thoughts, list their questions. What is the most important thing that you would want to know? And of course, once they open up, they're going to have 1,000 questions. And then find those who can answer them. Now, I've been doing this for 30 years, researching the Watchtower, researching truth, and doing my best. So I've been doing this for a long time, and others, they're just not going to be able to do that. But direct a person to some good source material on answering their questions, and at the same time tell them there's not just one answer. There isn't an inspired person on the planet who has this authority or all the answers. So don't throw out God just because you run into some bad answers. Don't give up. Don't get stressed, but don't give up in your search. Be a seeker. Jesus said, ask, seek, knock. He says that in the Sermon on the Mount. I think it was in Matthew 7. Ask, seek, and knock. You don't have to find the answers. God wants you to just be a seeker of the answers and know that God loves you, and know that John 13, 34, and 35, that the best marker of the true church, or I don't believe that there is such a thing as absolutely true church. There are churches that do better than others. So I set those expectations. I said, you will not find the perfect church or anyone that's the true church. I don't believe in that. Matthew 13 speaks of the parable of the wheat and the weeds. And the message there is, when you find even a good church, there could be some weeds in there. So I set their expectations. But I say, if you want to look for a better church, look for two things. John 13, 34, and 35. Do they have love amongst themselves? Okay. And two, love God, love their neighbor. Okay. So they have, again, this love, and they are seeking, ask, seek, and knock. These are things. I also throw in, I mentioned earlier on the show, Romans 14. Do they have a policy to not be judgmental, not be critical, allow you to ask questions, and if you disagree on minor things, it's okay. And if you disagree on the major things, well, help them by discipling them. If they don't believe that there's a God, we'll offer some answers there. If they wonder if there's a creator, or they wonder if there's a resurrection, have someone that is capable, qualified, and patient. And then direct them step by step through this, starting though with love, kindness, friendship.
Love is the big one. Love,
Yes.
because we didn't have that, and I'm sorry to interrupt you again. I was just thinking, because I've been stuck on this whole thing with love, because we were convinced, we were deceived, and if you came from the Watchtower, we were convinced, we were deceived in thinking it's unconditional love. And look at the assemblies. You got African Americans, Hispanic, Asian, white, Caucasian. You got everybody sitting side by side, and doesn't that just prove everything? And then you go back to your congregation, and you see elders treating people differently, even by their race, and stuff that I saw in that, and it was like going to the circuit assembly, especially the big assemblies. It was hard, because when you see the deception, you see when you're looking for the spirit of truth, and you see deception, and you're taught, basically, if you doubt any of this stuff, it's a Satan putting doubts in your mind and whatnot. So you get most people. That's why they say most people are like zombies in the organization, because their spirit is shut down. They're just on almost like autopilot. What do I got to do? Tell me how to do it. But see, then I realized that other churches are the same way. I went to a lot of other churches when I left, and I realized something. You had religious people and you have spiritual people. The religious people just want to be told, what do I got to do? Just tell me what I got to do, and I'll go do it. Lay it out for me. The spiritual people were like the Bereans, like babies. Why? Why is it this way? Why do I got to do it this way? And that's the beauty of that, is that's how you grow. That's how you learn. But so many people, I've even noticed this even outside the organization and other churches, it's the same way. They're looking for an answer, for somebody else to lay the platform out for them. And Watchtower is perfect at that. They dumbed you down. They helped you turn your spirit off, basically, and you just become a physical person. You're no longer a spiritual person. You're a physical person doing the physical things. And so what I have seen, to make it short and sweet, is people are stuck in the mind and not in the heart. What were we taught about with Jehovah's Witnesses? Stay away from the heart. The heart is a treacherous thing, and they quoted a scripture, blah, blah, blah. But my point is, that's where people, in my opinion, they're stuck in the mind. That's where fear, anxiety, doubts, everything lies. But until we get back into the heart, which Jesus was trying to teach his disciples, he wasn't teaching them a religion. He was teaching them spirituality. He was teaching them to come from the heart. And they were missing a lot of that when they were arguing amongst themselves who would be the greatest. What did he do? He came down and started washing their feet. He's trying to get them out of the mind and back into the heart. And I think that's what so many of us are. And not that I'm perfect either. I'm working on all this and trying to figure this all out. But this is just my observation, my opinion, is that if we could get back into the heart, we could change the world. We could literally shift. Oh, of course. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yes, sister.
I wanted to make a plug for Rick's program, in that a lot of people come to the 6 Screens so they can talk their problems out and talk to others who had similar problems. And I'd like to recommend the Watchtower After Dark program, because Linda James, she was on until 7 o'clock this morning discussing different problems and situations that people have, and everyone gets together and helps them work things out. So I'd like to put a plug in for the 6 Screens and Linda James show.
Nice. I'll say that name again one more time for the listeners. Okay.
Are you asking?
Could you say that name again?
It's after dark. It's usually after 11 or 12 every
After
Saturday.
dark.
Yeah. And
Got
Mrs. James Apasta Babe. Her name is Apasta Babe. And she does the program. She does a super job. And people come in. And sometimes we have new people, sometimes we don't. But it's a good place to discuss things. All your problems, all your feelings, all your thoughts. And I think that if people need that kind of a program, they really enjoy it.
Right. And thank you very much. Yes, there's a lot of good therapy going on here on the 6 Screens. So that's a good source. To wrap up the answer to that question, what can we do to help x-JWs who have been abused and are hurting? Show them a friend, be a friend, and get them to understand that it's not about finding the answers and being in the truth and all that. Rather, ask, seek, and knock, that they should be seekers and be patient. It took me years to reach a point where I think I've got all the answers that I need to be balanced and understanding the point of scriptures. But I'm still learning and still growing. I have not learned everything. There's still more to learn, and it's a wonderful journey. But for someone that's lost and confused, get them rooted first on knowing a friend, being a friend, love, showing that Jesus taught to love God and love your neighbor. Teach them to be patient, they don't need to have all the answers. If they have some burning questions, write them down, sort them out at the top, and then explore patiently, trying to find good, solid answers. And if you find an answer that seems kind of wonky, don't stop there. Don't quit seeking. Look for multiple answers that you want to throw around in your mind on these various questions. Don't stop with the first answer. Even if it's an answer you like, don't stop there, but remember it. But keep seeking, see if maybe there's a better answer. Or maybe you're still under the deception of the Watchtower and come up with an answer that really isn't true. And just be a seeker. And that is one of the healthiest things to be. Once they get to a point where they really are okay mentally and spiritually, they believe they're on a good track, and then they want some of the tougher questions, then that is different. But I believe that those answers are out there. I have found them myself, and that's why I do this program, because the questions that people have, and I truly have found satisfying answers. I know the Watchtower claimed to offer that, but they don't, as you know. But I have found satisfying answers for all my questions. They are satisfying, and it's compatible with a loving God and with the commandment to love our neighbors. It's compatible with all of that. It's very satisfying and has brought me great joy, but it took me a while to get there. But I want to help those that are feeling hurt, because I want to do for them what I wish someone could have done for me. So that's what this, again, that's what the purpose of the show is. All right. Well,
I want to say something to you, brother, is you know, I guess sometimes I look at myself as wrapped with caution tape. I'm under construction.
Right.
You're constantly learning, you're constantly growing, but I want to say thank you for you taking your time out to talk with people. And whether everybody agrees with everybody or not, it doesn't matter. It's you're coming from your heart. And I just wanted to thank you for spending your time. You know, that you could be doing other things. And thank you.
Right. And thank you very much for that encouragement. And that's another thing. Let's encourage people that are hurting to keep on the path of seeking and not giving up. And don't be worried about finding the truth. Rather, Jesus, I claim, Jesus is the truth. Just seek him. Don't worry about finding the truth or finding the true religion. Set that aside. We're not asked to find the truth other than finding Jesus. And that is a process, and to be patient. And while the Watchtower says, well, you got to know the truth. And their truth changes from day to day, like a person changes their socks. So don't get on that treadmill, and don't worry. Believe that God loves you, and that even if you've got something wrong, because you love God and because you're seeking him, it's going to be okay. Just repeat that to them. If you love God and you are seeking him, it's going to be okay. Where do I get that idea? Hebrews chapter 11, the Hall of Faith. What a wonderful chapter that is, Hebrews chapter 11. And it says in verse 6, for without faith it is impossible to please him. For whoever would draw near to God must believe two things. Here it is, that he exists and he rewards those who seek him. What's the thing here? Yes, you need to believe God exists. Okay, there are plenty of websites and information that will help a person who's not sure that God exists. But since we can't go up and see God and grab a hold of him, it takes faith. But there are apologists, people who defend the faith, who online will give you information to help you believe that God exists. Okay, that was one of two things. Do you remember what it was? First of all, draw near to God, we must believe that he exists. And second, he rewards those who seek him. So if they're seeking God, this is Hebrews 11:6, are they seeking God? And doesn't mean they found him, but they are seeking him. Encourage your friend that they are seeking God, and therefore from Hebrews 11:6, this is a good thing, that they are seeking God and they are having faith that there must be a God, a good God out there. This counts more than anything else. The other verse I would throw out here for consideration is Luke 19:27. This talks about who the bad guys are. The bad guys, it says, but as for these enemies of mine, who did not want me to reign. The enemies are not those who just don't know the truth or have lost or can't find it. The enemies are those who know about Jesus, and after knowing about Jesus, want to fight him, want to oppose him, and they do not want him to reign and to be king. So I tell people, as I do on the show, after you read the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapters 5-7, would you, if this guy was real, if he actually exists, would you want him to be king? After you read that Sermon on the Mount and understand what you can, would you say this guy is a good guy? You go to Luke 23, where he's dies on the cross, and he says, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." I ask this: would you want, if this guy were real, would you want him to be king? And they say yes. And I says, therefore, according to Luke 19:27, you are not his enemy. And you are not here on the list of those who are to be slaughtered, because you are not in opposition to Christ. You are seeking. That's the safe place to be. Just a few words there, a couple scriptures, and I believe that is very comforting. And then a person can say, okay, I don't have all the answers. All right. So it's not a problem. The question and answer is, would you want Jesus to be king? Yes or no? And I've had some say, well, I don't believe in this, that, and the other, and I don't know about this fact. I says, excuse me, wait. Just this one question. The Jesus that you read about in the Sermon on the Mount, would you want him to be king? And they go, yes. And I says, therefore, sir, if you are a seeker and you stay on this path, I believe I will see you in the kingdom. And this is such a relief, just saying that little bit. Okay, well, it's been a good show, Rick.
Yeah, no, I'm just listening here, Jay. I like that seeking. I believe that's one of the things that you have to do. One of my favorite scriptures is Matthew 7:7. If you really want to come into the fold of Jesus, what you have to do is you have to keep asking, you have to keep seeking, and you have to keep knocking. Now, that seeking is searching, and if a person's doing that, they're on the right trail. Jay, I'm 100% in unison with you. We don't have to know all the answers, but just believe that Jesus exists and just keep seeking and trying to find more out about him. And like you say, let him be a king. Thank you, Jay. Great program.
All right, couple weeks.
All right, you got it. Thank you very much, Jay. And I want to thank all the people that came into the 6 screens this weekend. Boy, I have to tell you, friends, and I mean this sincerely, a lot of people are leaving the Watchtower right now, and we can understand why. Their policies on so many things are changing. Their theological teachings are so slanted and twisted. But, we had a lot of people come through this weekend, more than usual, where we're seeing numbers coming into the 6 screens that are just totally exploding. We had 6 new people come in last night. We had some new people come in today. So we're happy. And I know you guys are feeling good too, to see one of the worst, terrible occultic organizations on the planet being exposed. And I'm glad that's happening. So I want you all to keep standing tall, keep waving that flag of victory, and don't you ever give in, don't you ever give up. Keep moving forward and never let your visions die.
Is there any more shows today, Rick, or was that the last one?
That's the last one, Daniel. But glad to hear you calling in
Okay.
today. So that's the last one we got today. But we'll see you next weekend.
Sounds great. You guys enjoy the rest of your weekend.
To save a wretch like me, I heard about his groanings, of his precious blood's atoning. Then I repented of my sins and won the victory. Oh, victory in Jesus, my Savior forever. He sought me and bought me with his redeeming blood. He loved me ere I knew him, and all my love is to him. He plunged me to victory beneath the cleansing flood. I heard about his healing, of his cleansing power revealing, how he made the lame to walk again and caused the blind to see. And then I cried, dear Jesus, come and heal my broken spirit. And somehow Jesus came and brought to me the victory. Oh, victory in Jesus, my Savior forever. He sought me and bought me with his redeeming blood. He loved me ere I knew him, and all my love is to him. He plunged me to victory beneath the cleansing flood. I heard about a mansion he's built for me in glory. And I heard about the streets of gold beyond the crystal sea. About the angels singing and the old redemption story. And some sweet day I'll sing up there a song of victory. Oh, victory in Jesus, my Savior forever. He sought me and bought me with his redeeming blood. He loved me ere I knew him, and all my love is to him. He plunged me to victory beneath the cleansing flood.
You're on the Six Screens Telenetwork, earning the reputation of giving all the right ingredients, uninhibited, in exposing the hard, cold facts about the Watchtower Society. And now, the end, Disney.